Hey gang, welcome back to another video and part 2 of my Haunted Mansion inspired bust build. Well, there's been a temporary break in the weather, and so while there's a bit of sunshine, I'm going to wrap up this build. So let's get to it. Having set aside the foam portions of the build, I can get started on the head. The Hauntley's projection bust is a great piece, but it's got a big base on it that won't work for this build. So before I can get to working on that part of the project, I'll need to remove the electronics. Inside you'll find a small short throw projector, a speaker, a power module, and control buttons, as well as the circuit board that's attached to the side of the projector. With all the internal parts removed, I can get to cutting away the base. I started by drawing a line around the neck at the thinnest part, and then grabbed my hacksaw and got to it. Once the base is removed from both halves, I can put them back together so that I can trace the shape of the neck. This sketch will eventually get turned into a 3D model and a 3D print, which will become the new neck for this prop, but more on that in a minute. Since the base of this piece housed the power input, and I still want to be able to access the internal memory, I decided to get some weatherproof micro USB extensions and will mount them to the back of the head. When I've got both extensions installed, I can connect the cords to their respective parts and reassemble the projector. With that out of the way, we can get back to the sculptural part of this build. After my discussion with Mrs. Van Oaks, I removed a bit of the excess foam from the back side of the bust and rotated the foam shoulders forward a bit before reattaching it to the base. This helped to get the proportions to look more like I'd envisioned and would put the head in a better position. After a bit of 3D printing, I had the new neck for the head to rest on and could use it to determine where I'd need to carve out foam from the existing structure. Then I could grab a blade and get to cutting. I eventually switched over to my rotary tool with a sanding drum to remove the bulk of the foam, and when it looked like I had enough room for the neck, I grabbed some glue in my spray bottle and set the neck in place. While I waited for the glue to fully cure, I could switch over to the decorative elements of the bust, starting with the coat. To make creating the lapels easier, I used an actual suit and made a template with painter's tape, which was transferred to some 6mm EVA foam and cut out with a fresh razor blade. Then I flipped the cut piece to make the opposite side and could get to placing it on the bust to check proportions. I repeated this step with some 3mm foam for the inner coat, and when I was happy with how everything looked, I could use a bit of contact cement to glue all of the pieces together. Once all the parts were cut and glued, I could get to assembly, starting with this mock collar. This was a detail we saw in a lot of different statues and thought it would be a great way to also hide the replacement neck. This got hot glued to the back and along the bottom edge to make sure that the seams would be covered by the other foam pieces. The next detail I wanted to add was a cravat or an ascot. This would also be a great way to hide the neck, but would be an easy way to add some more dimensional detail to the final prop. Now, I didn't have a cravat or a sewing machine, but I did have an old bandana and a glue gun, so I took a page from RuPaul's Drag Race and hot glued my costume together, adding small pleats to the fabric and hot gluing them in place until I had something that resembled a cravat. Then I could glue it between the flared tips of the collar piece. With that out of the way, I could do a quick test fit of my other foam pieces and then hot glued them all in place. The last step before paint is to fill in any gaps with a bit of paintable caulking. This will help to tidy up any inconsistencies in the surface and should make it look like a solid piece rather than individual layers of foam. When that was done, I could glue the bust to the base. Because this glue likes to foam up as it cures, I threw some weights in to help keep it in place while the glue dried. When everything had some time to dry, I could start painting the busts with some latex masonry sealer. First by brushing it on, and then by going back over the surface in a pouncing motion to hide any brush strokes. I'll give this a first coat and let it dry for a while before applying a second coat to help build up texture. Now that everything's had sufficient time to dry, I can attach this plaque I made for the base. A bit of a nod to Haunted Mansion voice actor Thurl Ravenscroft, whose face will be used for the projection part of this build. This plaque was painted in the same manner that I painted the transom ironwork on my Haunted Mansion door build, and I'll link to that tutorial in the video description if you want to check it out. The last thing to do for this build is weathering. I'll mix up some black, raw umber, and mossy green acrylics with water to make a wash, and we'll apply it in layers with a spray bottle. This is the best way I've found to replicate organic weathering, since this method is essentially the same, although rather than moisture activating the natural dust and dirt that would accumulate on a monument, I'm faking it with a spray bottle full of murky water. To help blend the projection head with the rest of the bust, I'll make the neck and shoulders area a bit darker than the rest of the monument. I may go back in the future and paint parts of the head that doesn't impede the projection, but there's rain in the forecast and I don't want to press my luck. And when I'm happy with how it looks, I can leave it to dry completely and wait for nightfall to test out the effect. So there you have it, my take on a Haunted Mansion classic. And while there's definitely some small things that I would change about it, mainly in the paint, overall I'm really pleased with how this turned out and think it'll be an amazing addition to our haunt. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.